Every animal we ever tamed drew a line somewhere. Not always the same line, but always a line. Cattle would graze near a settlement by day and still bed down in their own herd at night, shoulder to shoulder with other cattle, not with us. Horses, even the most obedient ones, gravitated back toward the herd once the saddle came off, sleeping in tight defensive circles that had nothing to do with the humans who fed them. Cats, the ultimate half-tamed animal, chose their sleeping spots with total indifference to where any human happened to be lying. Even goats, penned inside the same enclosure as people for thousands of years, kept their bodies pointed toward each other in the dark, not toward us. One animal never drew that line, not once, not anywhere. For at least 15,000 years in caves, huts, tents, longhouses, apartments, and everything in between, it has done the same strange thing every single night. It has tried to get as close to a sleeping human as it is physically allowed to get. You already know which animal this is. It is probably within arm's reach of you right now, or it will be tonight. And the question worth asking is not why dogs like comfort. Every animal likes comfort. The real question is much stranger and much older. Why, out of every species humans ever lived beside, is the dog the only one that treats sleeping near a human as something worth fighting for? Why does a creature that is fully capable of surviving, hunting, and sheltering on its own still choose, every single night, to close the distance instead of keeping it? This is not a story about a needy animal. Refusing to sleep apart from someone is not a personality quirk. In evolutionary terms, sleep is the single most dangerous thing an animal ever does. It is the moment every defense goes offline. Choosing where you sleep and who you sleep near is one of the oldest and most serious decisions in the animal kingdom. What happened between humans and dogs did not just rearrange where a domesticated animal spends its evenings. It rewired what an entire species considers safe. And once you understand how that rewiring happened, you will never look at a dog curled against your leg the same way again. To understand why dogs refuse to sleep away from us, you first have to understand what sleeping apart looks like for almost every other animal humans ever brought close. Because nearly all of them do it, and the difference between those animals and the one pressed against your feet tonight is not affection. It is architecture, built into the nervous system over thousands of generations, and it runs far deeper than anyone expected. Take horses. A horse can be raised entirely by hand, trained since birth, groomed and fed and spoken to every day of its life. But put that horse in a field with other horses at night, and it will sleep standing in a loose circle with them, taking turns keeping watch, exactly the way wild horse bands do. The human who raised it is not part of that watch rotation. It was never invited to be. Cattle do the same. Sheep do the same. Even highly social farm animals maintain a sleeping structure that answers to their own species first. Cats never fully surrendered this instinct at all. A cat sleeping on your chest tonight might sleep in a cupboard tomorrow, on a windowsill the night after, or outside altogether if the opportunity presents itself. Feline sleep location is driven by temperature, safety from other predators, and personal preference, not by proximity to a specific human. Some cats gravitate toward people, many do not. There is no universal, species-wide rule that says a cat must be near a human's body to feel secure enough to sleep. So here is the test worth running. Remove the human from the equation entirely, and watch what each species does with its sleeping arrangements. Horses reorganize into their own watch groups. Cattle regroup with cattle. Cats scatter according to comfort and safety, with or without people nearby. And dogs, left entirely without humans. Feral dog populations still exist all over the world. They form packs. They hunt. They raise young. They find shelter. They are perfectly capable of building an independent sleeping structure that has nothing to do with people, the same way feral horses and feral pigs do. And yet study after study of free-ranging and feral dog populations turns up something strange. Even dogs with no direct daily human caretaker still position themselves disproportionately close to human settlements, human paths, and human shelters when they sleep, far more than the food or the weather alone would explain. They are not merely tolerating proximity to survive. Something is still pulling them toward it, even generations removed from a specific owner. Whatever changed inside the dog did not simply teach it to accept a leash and a bed. It appears to have shifted where the animal's nervous system feels safe enough to actually go unconscious. That raises the deeper question. Was this only training, something taught to individual dogs by individual humans over a single lifetime? Or did something get written more permanently into the species, the same way a fear response or a hunting instinct gets written in? One of the strangest places researchers have found an answer is not in a sleep lab at all. It is inside the biology of stress itself. Sleep depends entirely on one thing above all others: the shutting off of the threat detection system. An animal's brain constantly runs a background calculation of danger, and it will not allow deep, vulnerable sleep until that calculation reads low enough. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, has to drop. Vigilance has to drop. For a wild canid, a wolf sleeping in the open, that calculation almost never fully clears near an unfamiliar large mammal, especially not one capable of killing it. Proximity to a human, for a wild wolf, should keep the threat calculation elevated, not lowered. But something measurably different happens in the modern dog. Multiple studies tracking cortisol and heart rate in dogs sleeping near a familiar human, compared with dogs sleeping alone or near a stranger, find lower physiological stress markers in the presence of a trusted person. The dog's threat detection system, the very system that should be keeping it awake and alert around a much larger species, appears to specifically exempt certain humans from the calculation. That is not something you can train into an animal in an afternoon. That is a nervous system that has been recalibrated, generation after generation, to treat a specific category of large mammal as safe enough to lose consciousness next to. Researchers eventually found a useful analogy in an unrelated field entirely: infant attachment research. In the 1960s, psychologist Mary Ainsworth developed what became known as the strange situation, a test designed to measure whether a human infant treats a caregiver as a secure base, a person whose presence lowers stress enough that the child can relax, explore, or rest, and whose absence raises stress measurably. When researchers adapted a version of this test for dogs decades later, replacing the caregiver with an owner, the results were startling. Dogs tested in an unfamiliar space showed classic secure base behavior around their owner, exploring more when the owner was present, showing signs of stress when the owner left, and calming rapidly when the owner returned. Wolves raised in comparable conditions, with extensive human contact from birth, did not show the same pattern to the same degree. The dog was not simply comfortable around humans. Structurally, its nervous system was treating a human being the way a human infant treats a parent. That distinction matters enormously for sleep specifically, because a secure base is not just a preference. It is the psychological condition an animal needs in order to fully disengage its defenses. If a dog's nervous system files a particular human under the same category an infant files a parent, then sleeping close to that person is not comfort-seeking. It is the dog doing the one thing every prey-vigilant brain is designed never to do carelessly, fully powering down next to another large animal, because some deep layer of its biology has stopped flagging that animal as a threat at all. Here is a strange way to test how unusual this actually is. Take a hand-raised wolf, bottle-fed from birth, socialized daily with the same humans who will care for it for years, and place it in a room with those humans at bedtime. Then take an ordinary dog with a similar upbringing and do the same thing. You might expect the wolf, raised under nearly identical conditions of human contact and care, to settle just as readily. In practice, researchers working with socialized wolves have repeatedly noted the opposite. Hand-raised wolves can become genuinely bonded to their handlers and will seek them out during the day, but they tend to remain more physically restless, more prone to pacing, and less willing to fully relax into deep, vulnerable sleep in close human contact than dogs raised the same way. The wolf's threat calculation lowers with familiarity, but it rarely disappears the way it does in a dog. Even extensive, loving human contact from birth does not fully unlock the same shutdown of vigilance that comes standard in an ordinary house dog that has never been specially trained for it at all. Whatever changed in the dog was not simply a product of a caring upbringing. It was already sitting in the species before any individual animal was ever raised by anyone. If that recalibration happened at the level of the species, we should expect to find its fingerprints going back thousands of years, in the layout of the oldest human sleeping spaces we have ever excavated. And we do. Archaeologists studying ancient hearth sites going back well over 10,000 years have repeatedly noted something about where the earliest confirmed dog remains turn up relative to human sleeping areas. They are not found at the edge of the settlement, in the refuse pits, or in the spaces reserved for other domesticated or scavenging animals. They are found close to the hearths themselves, in the same warm inner ring where humans slept, in post holes and floor layers associated with sleeping platforms rather than work or storage areas. At more than one ancient campsite, the physical positioning of dog skeletal remains sits close enough to the human sleeping area that researchers have specifically noted it as a departure from where other animal remains, including livestock and working animals, are typically found. This pattern shows up again in burial evidence. In multiple ancient graves across Eurasia, dating back well over 10,000 years, dogs were not buried in a separate animal pit at the margins of a cemetery. They were placed directly beside human bodies, sometimes touching them, sometimes positioned as though curled at the feet or the side, the exact posture a sleeping dog takes beside a sleeping owner today. Whoever buried these animals was not disposing of livestock. They were replicating, in death, the exact physical arrangement that pair had likely shared in life, night after night, for years. None of this proves what those ancient people felt. Archaeology cannot recover love, but it can recover pattern, and the pattern is consistent across an enormous span of time and geography. Wherever early humans slept, the dog's remains tend to end up close by, not at the edge of the group where a merely tolerated animal would be expected to stay. The pattern does not stop at prehistory either. It keeps showing up as human civilization gets more complicated, which is exactly what you would expect if the underlying pull was biological, rather than a single cultural habit that could have easily been dropped along the way. In parts of the ancient Near East, household floor plans from thousands of years ago include small recessed sleeping areas near the main hearth, clearly scaled for an animal rather than a person, positioned inside the same warm core of the house reserved for the family, not in an attached pen or a separate structure built for livestock. In cold climate settlements across Siberia and the Arctic, ethnographic and archaeological records describe entire households, humans and dogs together, sleeping in a single shared layer of furs and bodies through the coldest months, with the dogs functioning as both companions and heat sources placed deliberately close to the humans they slept beside. If the relationship were only practical, only about warmth in one direction, you would expect that arrangement to disappear the moment better insulation, walls, and fire management made a dog's body heat unnecessary. It didn't disappear. It simply moved indoors, into houses, then apartments, then, eventually, directly onto the mattress. For a real-time demonstration of how quickly this kind of behavioral shift can appear, we do not have to rely only on ancient bones. We have an experiment. In 1959, Soviet geneticist Dmitry Belyaev began selectively breeding silver foxes for a single trait: reduced fear of humans. Nothing about coat color, size, or intelligence. Only calmness around people. Within a handful of generations, something unexpected happened. The calmest foxes did not simply tolerate handling during the day. They began actively seeking out human contact, and observers specifically noted changes in how these foxes rested near their handlers, showing relaxed, splayed sleeping postures near humans that their wilder ancestors, and even their own less selected littermates, never displayed. Alongside the behavioral shift came physical changes nobody selected for directly: floppier ears, curled tails, patchier coats, more juvenile facial structure. Selecting for one trait, tolerance, quietly dragged an entire suite of other traits along with it, including, notably, the animal's willingness to fully relax its guard in a human's presence. The Belyaev foxes were never claimed to be a perfect replica of how wolves became dogs. The real domestication of the dog happened over a vastly longer period, under very different conditions, that we can never fully reconstruct. But the experiment proved something critical. A nervous system's threat calculation around humans can shift measurably within a small number of generations once fearlessness becomes an advantage rather than a liability. It does not require intention. It only requires that the calmer, less fearful animals consistently get more access to safety, more access to food, and more opportunities to reproduce than their more anxious relatives. That is very likely what happened, night after night, at the edge of an ancient human camp. Imagine two wolves. The first hears a human voice in the dark and moves away immediately, sleeping at a wary distance the way a wild wolf pack sleeps around a den, alert, spaced out, ready to bolt. The second wolf is slightly less afraid. It does not run as far. Over time, it beds down a little closer to the warmth of the fire, close enough to smell cooking meat, close enough to hear voices without panic. Nothing catastrophic happens to it. No one drives it off. It survives the night. It survives the next one, too. Its body temperature stays higher through the cold hours. Its offspring inherit some of that same reduced fear, and they, in turn, bed down even closer. This process required no one to decide anything. It required only that calmer animals slept better, stayed warmer, and lived slightly longer than anxious ones, generation after generation, until an entire population's baseline comfort distance from a human sleeping body had shrunk from a wary perimeter into almost nothing at all. But there was another advantage sitting underneath all of this that had nothing to do with humans specifically. Wolves already slept socially. Wild wolf packs rest in contact piles, curled against each other for warmth, protection, and reassurance, with pups especially seeking body contact with adults through the night. That sleeping architecture, the instinct to press against a trusted body in the dark rather than sleep alone, was not invented for humans. It was already sitting inside the wolf, built for other wolves. Humans did not have to teach this animal how to want a warm body beside it at night. They simply became eligible, over time, to be that body. Once that eligibility was established, the relationship could travel in almost any direction humans needed. As human life diversified, so did the dog's role at night. Hunting camps needed a dog sleeping light, near the entrance, ready to raise the alarm at the first unfamiliar sound. Farming villages needed dogs stationed near livestock enclosures through the night, guarding rather than merely resting. Northern communities relied on sled dogs curling together in the snow for warmth, forming living insulation for each other and for the humans nearby. Wherever human sleeping arrangements changed, whenever people moved from open camps to houses to apartments, the dog's specific nighttime position adjusted with them, but the underlying pull toward proximity never disappeared. It simply found a new shape to fit. Look at how this plays out today, across an almost absurd range of breeds. A 7-pound lapdog and a 150-pound mastiff barely resemble each other physically, and yet both, left with the option, will typically choose to sleep pressed against a human rather than alone in a separate room, even when a perfectly comfortable dog bed sits a few feet away. That is not something every dog is individually trained to want. It shows up so consistently across breeds with wildly different histories, jobs, and temperaments that it looks far more like a shared inheritance than a coincidence repeated thousands of times over. Breeds built for completely different purposes still carry the same nighttime pull. Livestock guardian breeds, developed for centuries to spend entire nights outdoors protecting flocks with minimal direct human contact, still gravitate toward the specific humans they consider their own when given the chance, choosing a spot near the farmhouse door over the open field whenever the option exists. Hunting breeds developed for stamina and independence in the field still default to pressing against an owner's side the moment the working day ends. Even breeds shaped almost entirely around companionship, with no working role left at all, show nothing new here. They simply show the underlying instinct with none of the competing job left to distract from it. Strip away the herding, the guarding, the retrieving, the pulling, and what is left underneath every single one of those very different animals is the same nightly behavior that was there before any of those jobs existed. Get close, stay close, power down. There is one more layer to this that makes the bond even stranger, and it has nothing to do with bones or hormones. It has to do with what happens inside two bodies at the exact moment they fall asleep near each other. Researchers studying co-sleeping between familiar humans and dogs have found that a dog's sleep cycle, its transitions between light rest and deeper sleep stages, can shift measurably depending on whether a trusted person is nearby versus sleeping alone, with dogs reaching restful states faster and waking to check their surroundings less often when a familiar human is within physical range. In other words, the presence of the right person does not just make a dog willing to lie down close by. It appears to change how efficiently the dog's brain can actually complete the process of falling fully asleep. Some researchers studying the broader human-canine bond have proposed that this works in both directions, with owners who co-sleep with a trusted dog also reporting a subjective sense of security that measurably affects how quickly they personally settle into sleep as well. Two nervous systems, shaped by entirely separate evolutionary paths, appear to have converged on using each other as a signal that it is finally safe to stop watching the dark, which brings us back to the deepest version of the original question. If dogs can survive entirely without us, hunting, denning, raising young, and sleeping in their own packs the way feral populations around the world prove every day, why does the pull toward human sleeping proximity never fully switch off, even in dogs that have never had a single owner? Researchers studying free-ranging dog populations near human settlements have repeatedly observed that even unowned, semi-feral dogs cluster their resting and sleeping locations disproportionately close to inhabited areas, closer than food availability alone would predict. Some individuals form loose, non-exclusive bonds with specific people who feed them, without ever becoming fully owned pets, and these dogs still show a measurable preference for sleeping near that person's territory over sleeping with their own loosely organized dog group. Going feral does not erase thousands of years of accumulated nervous system recalibration. A feral dog can absolutely live in the wild. It does not, and functionally cannot, fully unlearn the pull toward a human sleeping presence. That door only ever swung open in one direction. Picture it one more time, the way it likely happened for real, thousands of years ago, at the edge of firelight nobody today will ever see. A wolf lying just outside the reach of the flames, watching a group of humans settle down for the night. Every instinct built over millions of years of predator evolution says to keep its distance, to sleep where it can run. But this wolf does not move away. It shifts a few feet closer instead. Nothing happens. No one drives it off. The night passes. It is warmer than the last one. Weeks later, it is close enough to hear a human's breathing change as they fall asleep. Months later, its own pups are born close enough to the fire that the flicker of it is the last thing they see before their eyes close. Generation after generation, the gap between a wary animal at the tree line and a sleeping animal at a human's side keeps narrowing. A body that once needed 30 feet of open ground to feel safe enough to close its eyes learns to settle for 10, then 5, then the width of a doorway, then, eventually, nothing at all, until there is no wolf left standing at the edge of the firelight anymore. There is only the shape curled against a human ankle, breathing slow, no longer running any calculation at all, because somewhere along the way, without either species designing it, one of them decided the other was safe enough to fall asleep beside. That decision was never made once. It was made again every single night for something like 15,000 years, by animal after animal, generation after generation, in caves and hide tents and longhouses and farmhouses and apartments, until refusing the distance stopped being a choice at all and became simply what a dog is. Every dog sleeping tonight anywhere on earth, tucked against a hip or stretched across the foot of a bed or pressed into the crook of someone's knees, is still finishing a decision that started at a fire none of us will ever see, made by an animal that looked at the most dangerous species on the planet and, for reasons it could not have explained, decided to lie down closer instead of walking away. That is the reason a dog tonight will not choose the empty bed across the room. It will choose you.